Today we're going to talk about the topic of how much you should tell your children when it comes to marriage problems and dilemmas, even just daily maybe miscommunications or fights that you might get in. And also, if you have something as hard as infidelity, how much and when to share with them. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. This is Rusty and Heather Bryant back with you, and hopefully I'll make it through this without a coughing fit.
I was just fixing to say, it's Heather and James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones, Darth Vader.
That's right.
Dum, 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 dum. We just recorded just a few days ago, and I said something about being a little bit under the weather, and it was just kicking in.
Yeah.
And now it has
Full-blown.
really kicked in. But got a couple of shots and got some medicine, and hopefully we'll be back on the mend here pretty soon.
Hopefully next Sunday you'll sound normal.
Yeah, that would be great. I hope I feel a lot better before next Sunday.
Yes.
So today we have a topic that I know we've touched on it a little bit throughout our story, but I don't think that we've ever really just kind of discussed on an entire podcast episode, just about involving your children in your conflict, whether it's small or big. And we had one of our listeners, write in this week asking questions about that, and it just made us start thinking a little bit about, what kind of advice would we give. And of course, we can tell our story and what we did and how we did it and why we did it, but I think there's a lot more to it. So.
Sure.
We're just going to dive into that a little bit. And first of all, like you said on the intro, which you did a great job, it was one take, and that never, ever happens
for me.
But you said, how much do you involve your children in just even like your daily conflicts and stuff?
Yeah. The reason why I said that at the beginning is because I think, and I know our parents sometimes listen to these and they may hear some of this and go, oh no. And it wasn't a negative thing. It's just something that I learned growing up is I never saw my parents fight. Ever. And I mean, maybe somebody's thinking, well, that's good, isn't it? But the first time we got in an argument, I thought, oh my gosh, something's really wrong with our marriage because we're having an argument, because I just didn't see it with my parents. And I know they argued, they had to, all couples do, but I guess they did it behind closed doors or when we were asleep, had discussions about things, but I just don't ever remember it. So it kind of set me up for failure when it came to our marriage, because when we did argue, I was like, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted it to be something that we talked about with our children. Although I will say I didn't think about it that way until we went through infidelity 12 years ago, and we were kind of forced into what do we want to tell our children? What don't we want to tell our children? What's age appropriate, all of those things. But then it put a big spotlight on the fact that we need to be talking about, all the things with the kids. And so that was just it just opened a lot of doors for us when it came down to that. So I think you have to go back and look at your family of origin. Like, where did your parents fight a lot? Did you see them fight a lot? Did they fight well? Did they fight fair? Did they fight in truth? Or was it done behind closed doors and you didn't really know that they had disagreements? And so that when you're faced with them, it was a bigger deal than you had anticipated.
Yeah. I think there's a fine line and a balance too, because there's obviously some stuff that you and your spouse and just married couples in general are going to have arguments and disagreements about. And, a lot of those, they do need to be in private.
Sure.
I mean,
No doubt.
there's certain topics, obviously, but just, the whole, a conflict comes up and, one or both of you goes, let's not talk about this in front of the kids,
Right.
that kind of a thing.
Sure.
I think that's maybe one of those where, depending on the age of your children, they need to start seeing some healthy conflict resolution.
Sure.
And I think that if there's none of that going on, if they never see you fight, well, they're going to at some point, and their question. I've heard so many children that see their parents get into an argument, and they actually will ask the question, "Are y'all going to get a divorce?"
Right.
Because they just don't understand it.
Sure.
And so I do think that, again, so much of it depends on the age of the children. And, even when we were responding to this couple, we didn't know the age of the children at the time when we first started trying to give some answers. But part of it is that your children better than anyone.
That's right.
And so their hearts, what they respond to, and
what they can handle.
Yeah.
All of that.
And also, we're not saying to stage fight so that they can learn how to fight, but it's just like it needs to be okay for them to see the and how you work through conflict.
That's
because they're going to have it one day, and they're going to have it with you. And so it's just a part of life. And so I think it's important. And again, there's just this balance, because you don't want to, throw your children into some deep topic that they don't have any business being a part of.
That's
that it's
right.
just going to hurt them.
And
even
we
more.
say fight, and we mean disagreement and arguments. We are not talking about physical stuff.
Right. No no throwing
there's
stuff, no physical.
never
Yeah.
a time.
Not even verbal, really.
No
abuse.
No.
Like, it's just
Degrading.
conflict.
You aren't degrading your spouse in front of the children. I mean, you don't need to be degrading your spouse at all. But this is not talking down to them or belittling them. This is just conflict in general, disagreements, or, just discussions on how much you want to spend on dinner. I mean, that happens. It happens. Like, oh, let's not go there. That's a little steep for right now, and them being able to see that there can be a conversation about it, and they're watching how you love each other well through that, and respect each other well through that, and how the wife submits to that. I mean, like, it's all such a bigger picture than just where we're going for dinner. There's just so many good things that your children can learn if you do it well. And I mean, you're going to mess up. We have messed up. I mean, there have been lots of times that we were like, yeah, we probably should have saved that until later. But in general, we just try to give a real picture of marriage, which includes disagreement sometimes for the kiddos to be able to watch. I like to use the word when I answer this with people, because of course, the text or message we got this week was a lot about infidelity. But, I mean, and telling the kids. How do you tell the kids? Do you tell the kids? Of course, we had no choice, because ours was very, very public.
Well, let's go and tell that. But
okay,
you were fixing to.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one was the extreme, but we deal with things all the time about just on a smaller scale, not necessarily infidelity. But, just smaller versions of things that people ask us, do we tell our children? And it's just, especially when something's not public. And I think that that's a part of it too.
Well,
I may have lost my train of thought on where I was going with that. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just, I didn't want you, that's why I stopped you, because I didn't want you to lose your train of thought. But when you were talking about how, your kids, they do need to see it. And we've messed up before in those areas. But one of the things that I think is also important is for them to be able to see one or both spouses apologizing.
Sure.
And,
That's
when you have a conflict in front of your children, sometimes you really need to check your own heart, because like, I'm not, again, this is very valid in some areas, but I can remember before we knew how to handle conflict correctly. There would be times where we would have little disagreements, and it would scare you so bad, but your heart was, you would whisper to me, and you would say, don't, like, it was like, don't do this in front of them, and your words were, you're embarrassing me. Like, that was your go-to, was that I was embarrassed, that it was an embarrassment to you. And so I think, and I know I felt the same way, and I think that that's where our hearts were not right. It was, we weren't in a place where we could go, hey, let's handle this conflict correctly. Instead, it was like, oh no, what are they going to think? What are my kids going to think about me? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, because you were looking at me kind of funny,
No,
like I was hurting your feelings again.
No, you're not hurting my feelings. No, and you're right. I did because my eyes were on me.
Yeah, but
I didn't want them to think any differently of me. I didn't want them to think,
right.
negatively
We wanted
about
to be the
marriage.
perfect. We wanted
That's
to be the
right.
perfect.
That's right.
And that's where it all changed and shifted, and where now we know the importance of being real,
That's
to
right.
our children,
Well,
and
that was-
especially now that they're 21
Right.
and 17
and have relationships of their own.
Yeah, we need them to see mistakes
That's right.
and pain and all of that.
And I love that you said that we apologize to them, because we have. I mean, we have done that so many times. Just, hey, Mom didn't handle that well. I snapped at Dad, and I shouldn't have responded that way. I shouldn't, and they need to see that. And they need to see me apologize to you as well. It's just part of, and again, you said this earlier, and I just want to reemphasize it. It doesn't mean that every argument needs to be in front of them.
Right.
You just have to know at what level and what they can handle, and what, that age appropriate is just super, super important.
And you certainly don't want it to escalate to where it gets out of hand and scares them.
Absolutely.
And that's when you need to know to put on the brakes. And again, we're not like encouraging you to fight. It's not that at all, but you're gonna have conflicts, and they're gonna happen in front of your children.
That's
and
right.
So, pick the times where you can go, okay, let's handle this appropriately, and let's make this be something that's positive for our children to see. Because I can also promise you this, because we've had kids that have grown up, they're way more intuitive than you think, and so they know. They know when you're fighting.
That's right.
So it just scares them. It shuts them down if they don't see you handle it. Because if they don't see you resolve the conflict, and they just, like, if you start the conflict and you just kind of go, let's talk about this later, then they never see the resolution. And they just think that you're just in a constant state of fighting.
Because the resolution comes, but it just comes behind closed doors later, where they don't witness it.
Right.
And so the last thing they knew, Mom and Dad were mad at each other.
Now, we are not parenting experts.
No.
And we actually have two pretty incredible boys.
Yeah, we do.
But, some of you, I know you want to know too, well, what if it is something bigger than just your everyday conflict? Do you tell your children? And that's a hard one, because it really, so much of it depends on age and circumstance, and because it's one of those deals where, let's just say infidelity's involved, or pornography, or it could be anything. Well, that's not like just one of those things that you go, well, let's round the kids up and tell them what's going on.
Right.
So you don't go to that extreme. Now, for us, this is how it went down. We had our children were 9 and 5 at the time. And, at first, when you first told me, before all of the truth came out, we weren't going to tell them. Because we didn't know who was going to know.
Right.
And why would we call the children in and say, hey, little 9 and 5-year-old, let me tell you what Mom just did. So that was never going to be the case. And I'm sure if the path had continued down that particular route, we probably would have discussed at some point, hey, when do they need to know? Or do they need to know? But what happened was, it got, over the next couple of days, it got very public. And when more information came out, and so I was we were at a point, we were in the counselor's office, and I was really scared. Well, for one, I didn't want you near me, and I didn't want you near the kids. I had no idea of your state of mind, and just, there was so much craziness going on that I basically got your dad to come and pick you up and take you to their house so that you wouldn't be at our house. So my first point is this. If there is something going on that's going to affect your children, they need to know something.
That's right.
And the main thing they need to know is they need to know that it's not their fault.
Absolutely.
And so we got together and discussed, okay, what are we going to do? Because, for an indefinite amount of time, and we had no idea. It could have been forever at that point.
We were just living one day at a time.
But we were like, okay, Mom's not going to be home. And there's a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old that are expecting to go to school every day and have a routine. And we're fixing to just completely explode their world. And so they have to know something.
Right.
Now, a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old do not understand what an affair is or what infidelity is. And so somehow we were smart enough to get together.
By the grace of God.
Yeah. To get
right
together. Yeah. To get together and to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this in a civil way? And I think it was brilliant. Look at me talking about this being something brilliant,
yeah.
but I think it was so wise on our part that we included your parents, because we kind of even in the midst of the craziness, it was like we don't want to ever one of us say, you said this, to try to turn the kids against me, or because I was still, I had no idea if our marriage was going to make it at this point.
Right. And you will never say this about yourself, so I'm going to say it. You were so incredibly hurt, but you never doubted for 1 minute how much I loved my kids, and so you didn't use it as ammunition against me. And that took such maturity that I think a lot of people don't have. And I'll tell you, I'm not sure I would have had it had the roles been reversed. Like, you not once said, Mom hurt us, Mom did this. You never used it as ammunition. And guys, you cannot use your spouse's failures as a weapon against your children. You can't do it. And so well,
it's not fair to them. They didn't cause this.
They didn't cause it. And no matter what was going on between us, it didn't change how much I adored them and how much I loved them. And you were very careful to not make them see me in a negative light. So continue.
No, and so we just sat them down. And I don't remember our exact words, but I remember just telling them that you needed some time to work on some things in your own life. And so you were going to spend some time at your parents.
And I remember you saying to them, and I wasn't there, but I remember you telling me that you said, when y'all are hurt, or something has happened and it makes you sad, and all you want to be is with your mama and your daddy. Like, that you want to be with the people who love you and who care for you. And you said, and Mom's hurting right now and she needs to be with her mom and daddy. And I just remember thinking, like, how wise that was.
Okay, but you were there. We were together when we told them.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
I
you really just threw me off big time. I was like, what do you mean you weren't there?
Yeah,
no, we sat in your parents' living room.
That's right. I remember.
And it was just us and your mom and dad.
Yeah, I remember.
And so, you had a chance to hug them and tell them.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that it didn't have anything to do with them, and that I loved them,
that's
and
right.
I just needed some time with my mom and dad.
Yep.
That's right. I remember now.
And so, how'd you forget that?
It was a big old blur is how I forgot that.
Well, we were all together, and that was on purpose. Like I said, because I wanted us to be together telling them. And so they didn't ask any questions. They just didn't care because they were so young.
Yeah, that's right.
And, well, at least they didn't show that. And then over the next few days, we actually worked really, really hard to try to make their life very normal. And so
I came to soccer games, and
and you came home late. You came home at night. We helped put them to bed together, and then you left.
Yep.
Your dad actually took you home, and then he would bring you back in the mornings before they woke up. And so, it wasn't because we were hiding something. We were trying to make their life normal.
That's right.
And so it wasn't a, hide what we've done from them. It was, we want their life to be normal.
That's right.
As best we can.
And for us, it was so much easier, which we didn't know it at the time, but it's so much easier to be able to go back and talk to them about what happened once restoration had happened, because they could see it from that aspect. And we only told them what a 5 and 9-year-old could understand and needed to understand. And we sought counsel on that. We were, it's not like we knew what to do. We asked our counselor and both of our mentors, what is it, if anything, what is it that they need to know right now? And I remember after a little while, when I was back home, I remember you using the beautiful example of we live in a cul-de-sac, and I remember you saying, how we tell you not to go into the street. Okay, that's a boundary because we want to keep you safe. We're not being mean. We say, hey, stay in the driveway all you want to, scoot around, skate, whatever, but don't go past the driveway because it's dangerous. A car could hit you, whatever. And you said, and so we give you boundaries to keep you safe and because we love you. And then you said to them, you said, God does the same thing with us. He gives us boundaries for our safety and because he loves us and he wants to protect us. And he even does that in marriage. And you said that Mom stepped out of the lines of past the boundary. I stepped and therefore I hurt you, and that I was trying, you just did it in such a beautiful way to where you said God gives us boundaries in marriage, and I stepped over that. And then I am trying to do my part to make sure everything's right and that my relationship with the Lord is better and all of that. And that's how that may have even been a couple of years later when they were, maybe 7 and 11 or 10 and 6, something like that. It wasn't immediate because I wasn't in that place then. But I just remembered you doing it in a way that was appropriate for them. You didn't use the word affair we didn't use that word until much later.
Yeah. And now that you kind of are bringing it up, the reason why, and I wonder if, if our story had remained somewhat secretive, or if we had not started this whole marriage ministry thing, would we have been open with them? And I do think that at some point, because they become teenagers that have relationships and they make mistakes, and there's plenty of times where I think we would have been sitting with them and gone, let us tell you about our screw up. That's right. But what ended up happening for us is we were asked to share our testimony with our church through written. Somebody did an interview. And they did a write-up, and it was on on the worship guide that was going to be passed out at church. And so, we knew, our picture was on there, our kids, our whole story, and we knew it was going to be there. And so the night before, and again, our children were probably, it had to have been 3-4 more years later. And so we just sat them down again that night, and we said, hey, this is what you're going to see tomorrow, and we want you to know. And we used a little bit more appropriate words. I remember even saying that Mommy had a boyfriend. We used stuff that they could understand a little bit more, but we still didn't go into a lot of details. And again, our one kid was old enough to understand a little bit more, and the other one was hey, I'm ready to eat.
Yeah, because we were out there by the fire pit,
yeah,
and making s'mores, and we were like, "Do y'all have any questions? Anything you want to ask?" And one of them said, "Can I have another s'more?"
yeah.
I was like, "Okay, good talk."
But then, the older they got, I mean, our older one, I think he understood because he was older, all along. And so the struggles that he's gone through with relationships have just everything's been very open with him.
That's right.
But then, I mean, our 17-year-old, I mean, it was within the last year, I think, that we were driving home from church, and he said, I know y'all have this marriage ministry thing, and I know that y'all have, but exactly what happened? And we just
heart racing out of my chest.
And so
it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we just sat in the garage after we got home from church, and we just kind of told. And again, we were able to use appropriate 16-year-old terms, and so I think that so much of it just has to do with the age of the children, the circumstances. And at the end of it all, like I told this couple that was asking the question, you know your children best, and what words are going to encourage them and what words are going to hurt them, and you pray about it and you decide what's God leading us to do, because I don't know that there's a lot of circumstances where nobody knows what's going on, and you're like, all right, today's the day, bring the family in, family meeting, let me tell y'all what happened. It's probably one of those things that's going to come more naturally and organically, like when your child does something where they've really screwed up and they come to you and they're so embarrassed, and you're able to say, hey, look, I have messed up before, and then it comes out. So it's not, I don't know that it's one of those things where you're like, okay, when they turn 14 years old, they're old enough to understand. Right. I just don't know that it's something like that.
I think a great question to ask yourself is this helpful? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful, or is it helpful?
Yeah.
And if it's something that's going to be helpful towards your children or for your children, then you pray about. And I always, when I go in to talk about it, at any point, it's God, empty me of me and fill me with you, and please let every word that comes out of my mouth be your words. And one of the a quote I heard very recently by Matt Chandler said, redemption means that nothing will ever be wasted. And I love that, especially on this topic. Like, our hurt and what we went through isn't going to be wasted. I know we have a marriage ministry and we're blowing and going and encouraging people, but even if yours is hidden and it's just you and your spouse and the other person that knows about it, and there's no way it's ever going to come out, it's still your story and it's not going to be wasted. And so when it is appropriate, if it is appropriate, to use parts of it to encourage people and bless people and to speak into their lives, then use it. But you pray for that prompting for the Holy Spirit, and never use it as ammunition, never use it to hurt people, never use it to manipulate people. It just should be encouragement.
Yeah, that's good. I think the last thing I would say, because you just kind of made me think about this, is if there's some sort of a maybe, hey, my children might find this out, then that's one thing to consider as well, because you don't want them
from you.
Right. You don't want them hearing it from a friend.
No.
And so that's something. And again, it doesn't have to be that there's details or anything like that, but if there's a good chance that somebody might say something or bring it up, then that's another opportunity that you probably need to start thinking, we need to address it in some way. But anyway, yeah. So I thought about that when you were saying that it's secret and it might just be you and your spouse. We also know that things don't stay secret, even if you think they're going to be secret.
That's right.
And
That's right.
That's all I'm going to say about that. We have said that on this podcast a million times. Yeah. And if you
God
don't
has
believe
a way
us,
of bringing things
and if
into
you
the
don't
light.
believe us, just wait a little bit longer, and then tell us we were right. All right. Hey, thank you guys for listening today. And hey, be on the lookout because we are literally weeks away from our new branding, and we're excited about that. So just be on the lookout for it. And until then, we'll see you next time.